Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge country that I'm currently on. Today I'm located in the Darawal Nation, and I acknowledge with deep respect the traditional custodians of this land, the Wadi Wadi people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and to the Aboriginal community that continue to care for country. I stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history, and a continued effort to fight for Aboriginal justice and rights, paving the way for a strong future. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah O'Shea. I'm the Director of the National Centre for Student Equity in Higher Education. We call it NESHE for short. NESHE is housed at Curtin University and is funded by the Australian Commonwealth Government. We have a dedicated mission to improve the higher education outcomes, that is the access, participation, retention, success and completion rates for marginalised and disadvantaged people. We do this through a variety of strategies, including research, practice and policy. One of those strategies is the NESHE Fellowship Programme, and this week we are presenting our fellows and highlighting the research that they've been undertaking. Today I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Janine Delahunty, who is awarded a year-long equity fellowship to explore regional, rural and remote student experience. As you would be aware, this year has been particularly difficult and with our fellows experiencing varying levels of lockdown. And as you can imagine, we're all broadcasting from various locations around the country. Unfortunately, Janine is experiencing some difficulties with her Wi-Fi, which we hope will be resolved by the time we go to the Q&A. But if that's not the case, we will put other measures in place, I promise. So Janine's short video is entitled On Footprints, the University Experience and Why We Need to Listen to Regional Students. We've taken a slightly different approach to these presentations, and I've asked each of the fellows to prepare a short TED-style talk that focuses on a specific element of their research. And this is followed by a live Q&A session, we hope, which today will be facilitated by Dr. Cathy Stone, who is also a leading expert in online education and rural and regional students. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Nina, who's going to put up Janine's video, and I hope you enjoyed as much as we have.
First of all, I want to acknowledge that I'm on Yuin country, a beautiful part of southeast New South Wales, where I'm privileged to live and work. I'm grateful for the enduring knowledge embedded in country and to the Aboriginal custodians, elders and knowledge holders here. Well, what a year we've had so far. So many changes and disruptions to just about every aspect of our lives. And while some of these have certainly been a struggle, and without downplaying the impact of this pandemic, I found that the experience has challenged me in a good way and helped me appreciate some of the things that I've often taken for granted. And I know I'm not alone in this if Twitter or Facebook are anything to go by. So some things which may have caught my passing attention before have now captured my imagination. So I'd like to take you to one of my favourite places where I've found myself much more often than usual, in a place where I can walk and slow down a bit to think and reflect on lots of things. So let's imagine that now, here we are at my local beach, about 15-20 minutes away. And here's one of the many photos I've taken. I'll call it Footprints in the Sand. So under normal circumstances, I might think of footprints as interesting, but really quite unremarkable. But what started to capture my imagination was when I started to think about the people who made them. Let's just indulge in this idea a little bit. So when we look at the footprints, it's pretty easy to make some educated guesses. So we can see by the footprints which way they were heading. We can see how big or small their feet were. We can know if they were barefoot or wearing shoes. Even by the length of their stride, we could guess their height. Or if you happen to walk in each step, you could see how your stride matches to theirs. I won't go on because I think you get the picture. But this is what got me thinking. There's quite a lot of information in those prints. When I reflected a bit more, I started to think the footprints are perhaps a little bit like statistics. And by this I mean that there's only so much we can know from the footprints themselves. But there's so much that we cannot know. So some of the things footprints can't tell us are where were these people from, or how long they stayed, who they were with, how they were feeling, did they love it or not, would they ever come back? So it struck me that for all the evidence in front of me, I knew barely anything about the others who'd been there too. So in a similar way, for my fellowship, which focuses on the issue of regional student attrition, the stats were not going to tell me enough on their own. I could certainly get the big picture issues. So for example, did you know that regional enrolments have increased by 50%, but that only 23% of regional people have a degree? This compares to almost 45% of people in major cities. So you can see that these stats are really important to know. And like footprints, they can be fascinating, but they just don't go deep enough to really understand why is this so. But before you can start to offer any solutions, you need to find out what it is that gets in the way. And the best way I could do this, to fill in some of the detail, was to go to regional students themselves to find out from them about their experiences of being at university. And that's my project in a nutshell. Now I'm going to take you through some of the things that I've found so far. This is based on surveys and interviews with 80 regional students. These students were studying across 13 different universities or campuses. Most of them were over 21, but more than half of them were older than 30. Most were female, and many were studying full-time. And just over half were doing their degrees online. But at the time I collected this data, many more were adjusting to online because of COVID. So this gives some useful information about their student selves, but actually I want to know more. And this is where equity-related factors and other life responsibilities add more depth. And this is also where it starts to get really interesting. So students could select any combination of categories that were reflective of their own circumstances. Here the choices are set out quite clearly. So at a glance we can see that many come from working class backgrounds, first in their family or mature age. They also had many responsibilities on top of their study. But what's significant here is that most students selected more than one category. So we're starting to build up a better picture, but to me, this is still a bit footprinty. When you belong to multiple equity factors, it can feel like you're on an unequal playing field. So now I'm going to show you how I visualized equity factors in a way that alludes to this. This chord diagram shows an element of messiness, where the ribbons intersect and the thickness of each ribbon makes the weighted relationships across and between the equity factors much more visible. To me, this gives a better sense of the complexity of being regional as well as belonging to multiple equity factors. And it also allows us to imagine the compounding effect that intersecting equity factors may have over time. When I was going through the data, one of the surprising things for me was that almost all of the students stayed in their regional area. The benefits of staying regional were often talked about in relational terms, like the sense of community, the strong support networks, the willingness to help each other out. and that everyone knows everyone else, although sometimes this was not considered such a positive. What was less surprising was that once they have their degree, many students intend to give back to the regional communities that have given them so much. Let's turn our attention now to what students have said. So choosing to stay often meant choosing to study online. So while the flexibility aspects of online are a bonus, poor internet connection can be really frustrating and time-consuming. Only a regional person would understand that sometimes you have to sit up on a hill to get better internet. Here's what one of the students reflected. She is mature age. She's studying her accounting degree online and is doing this part-time. As well as that, she has school-age children. She works part-time and has community responsibilities. She says that you've got to understand that everything takes longer, that there's no instantaneous in the country, that even the simplest thing, like having the video on, can mean the difference of being able to attend or not. Staying can also mean having to travel long distances with no public transport options. So this is another reality that regional people are often resigned to. But a 7-hour round trip for a tutorial each week, when you work full-time and have 3 school-age children, makes life even more complex. Or when your mandatory placement is 9 hours from home and you have no family close by to look after your children. On top of that, you have to bear all the costs of travel, accommodation, as well as take recreational leave from work. These are big asks. Even so, the advice these students would give to other regional people thinking about uni is to definitely go for it. But there are also a range of emotions that go hand in hand with the experience. And this is what some of them said. It's like a roller coaster with moments of pride and elation and that special feeling of, wow, I've got this, mixed with high levels of stress. Or that it's difficult to juggle all the responsibilities without family support, especially as a single mum. Sometimes it feels lonely being an online student. Or finally this one, I wouldn't change it for the world. I've loved every moment, although it's been positive, but challenging. So why do we need to listen to regional students? Because we need to know more than what footprints in the sand can tell us. And unless we ask, we cannot actually know what the realities are for regional students. So regional people are often noted for their resilience and determination and for being highly motivated, but they can also be juggling many other things that can be compounding and can interfere with achieving their educational goals. So as universities, the best thing we can do is shut up and listen so that we can respond to what regional people themselves are telling us. Because when you think about it, putting our time and resources into developing support that's based on knowing barely anything about students' lived realities benefits no one. If we can simply shut up to listen and, of course, take heed, this will provide a more deliberate move towards making higher education more equitable than it currently is for regional students. Thank you for listening.
Well, I'm sure you'll agree that is just a terrific overview of Janine's research. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we have had some difficulties getting Janine online, but I'm hoping that we do have her on phone. Are you there, Janine?
I am here. I'm hoping that you can hear me too.
Oh, we certainly can, and we're very relieved to be there.
Believe me, so am I.
Well, I will not stay on too long. I just wanted to pass over now to Cathy and Janine, who carry on with the Q&A. As I mentioned at the beginning, we do have a Q&A box, and we would really welcome live questions. But we do have some that came in before, and so we will start with those questions. But over to you, Cathy and Janine.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and hello everyone. And Janine, I can't tell you how relieved I am to hear your voice. I thought I might have to do some terrible song and dance act, which no one would have appreciated.
That would have been entertaining.
Hardly. But anyway, let's move on. And it's a real pleasure to have been asked to facilitate this session, because I really do love Janine's work and what she's doing here. I think it's just fascinating. I particularly love her footprints analogy for statistics and all the things it can tell us and all the things that we don't know from it, and that we do need to shut up and listen instead. And I'm coming to you today from Darkinjungland, which is on the beautiful central coast of New South Wales. So Janine, first of all, tell us what brought you to this topic.
Okay, well, I guess I've had a long-term interest in students who are less advantaged in some way, but I think in order to get to that place, I need to go back in time a little bit. So I'm going to go back to my childhood, where I came from a working class background, and for a while Mum was a single mum with 4 young kids, and I'll just say hi Mum, because I think she's tuned into this webinar. And I know we struggled day to day, and also had, there were many extras that just weren't possible to have. And I'm not saying that these are unhappy times, but as a child I was well aware that some of the things were just out of reach, because that's the way it was. In terms of the regional aspect, I spent a number of years living on a property with my grandparents, so we moved in with them for a while. So there's 3 adults and 4 kids in a 2-bedroom home on the very outskirts of Western Sydney. So not exactly regional, but it was there that I spent some time in a 2-teacher school during my primary years. And this was a very low socioeconomic area with lots of disadvantage, and a place where I think a lot of people just escaped to. So there were lots of little shanty-style dwellings. And then Mum remarried, and my new dad came from a farming family in Cowra. So we had many trips there to visit his family, and lots of happy times there. So I left school after year 10, went to TAFE, Tech College, I think it was called then, and then worked in an office doing clerical work, and had a break of about 14 years after I had children. So I guess that kind of lived experience I brought to my own higher education journey. So coming into higher education as a mature age student, where I had to manage the juggle of a family of 3 who were then teenagers, and all of what goes with that, as well as part-time work and part-time study. And I also wasn't even sure if I'd like uni, so I just dipped my toe in, and the rest is history. So when I started, I was drawn to students who were struggling or just finding it difficult in some way, and ended up becoming involved in mentoring and organising study groups, and sort of being a proactive mature age student, and kind of a mum figure for some students. So I had a personal experience of the transformative power of education, and a key focus of my PhD study was on sense of belonging for online students. And then I started doing some RA work for Sarah, and mostly around first in family research, and then we continued working together on many of her projects, as you did too, Cathy.
Yes.
And as you know, and many people tuning in today know, first in family students often have backgrounds marked by multiple equity factors. And during this time, I felt really privileged to be invited into hearing some of their stories. One of the projects we did a few years ago was alongside the UNSW Aspire program, which was then headed by Dr. Janine. And Sarah and I made the trip to Dubbo for a 4-day workshop to capture the process of Year 11 students telling their stories about their hopes for the future through digital storytelling. And that was just a really amazing experience, and it just kind of whet my appetite. So when the opportunity came up for the fellowship, where there was a particular emphasis on improving outcomes and experience for regional students, it was just perfect timing in terms of melding together the passion and experience that I built up in the past few years of my academic work, as well as over my lifetime experiences. So the focus of the project is regional students, but as my research has confirmed, many regional students are also dealing with other forms of disadvantage that can be compounding and just make it harder to get over the finish line. And I'll just finish with one little bit. So back to my very personal interest in this project, living in regional and remote parts of Australia, and I'm some of the challenges of being regional, and that you know, how that adds to accessing and managing lots of things, including higher education study.
Oh, that's a wonderful story that you've told us, Janine, in terms of your own personal experiences and how your passion for this sort of work has developed, and your own journey. And thank you so much for that. We've got a lot of questions popping up on the Q&A, and there were also a couple of questions that came in when people registered. And one of the questions that came in when people registered it aligns very much with a very popular question, which is about the types of support that regional and remote students most request. And the question that came in the registration was, what do you think are the most proactive interventions that universities can do to build a sense of belonging for regional and rural students? So it's sort of a two-part question. What is it that regional and remote students are looking for when they're requesting support, if they're requesting support, and what are the sorts of the most proactive interventions that universities can do to create that sense of belonging for them?
Okay, well, I think the thing that comes out most clearly from the research I've done is that students want that connection, they want that human interaction, and they want that relationship. So opportunities to meet other students in similar situations or from similar backgrounds or interests has been talked about as really helpful. That their academic and professional staff at the universities or the campuses know who they are. They don't want to be a number, even though they understand that that's not always possible in big institutions, but they want that human connection. So I think any kind of intervention that facilitates those connections. I also think I want to emphasise that it's really probably the best place to start is to ask your regional and rural students. So find out from them what it is they need, what's going to work for them, because it is to a large extent. And I think I can almost guarantee that they will tell you what they need and that they will be grateful that someone has asked them.
It comes back to your shut up and listen point, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, probably about the only time and place that I can actually say that. But country university centres at this point, or the regional university centres, because every student who identified that they were engaged in these regional centres or university centres, they just can't speak highly enough of the services. So whatever they're doing to meet students' needs, it works. So I would suggest that that's another model when thinking about developing proactive interventions to have a good look at.
Look, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's come up as a very popular question, whether the regional students studying online are utilising the university, at the regional university centres well. And I know that from reading your June bulletin, there were a number of students who talked about the country university centres in Wales. So it's interesting to hear how supportive those are for regional students. And
yeah, and yes, also I think some of the like the smaller regional campuses, students really value the services that are provided there. You know, they can just pop in and talk to someone, and you know, it's a safe space for them, I think.
Yes. So the small regional campuses having a physical place where people can go where possible. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
I do have some examples. I don't know whether from staff participants. So I've got 3 examples that I'll share those, will I?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So the first 2 are activities that lecturers and tutors could easily implement, and the third one is institutional. And I know the question was about what can institutions, I think what's at the institutional level, but I think as Nicole Crawford's research showed, that students' wellbeing is closely connected to what happens in the classroom. So I think, this is another place where we need to start with the lecturers and tutors that students are in contact with. Is a lecturer who knows that some of her students commute, and so she wants to find out, how far each student has travelled to uni. And I think in the first tutorial, she gets them to form a continuum which goes from those who are only 5 minutes away to those who travel for hours. And then she gets students to talk to each other about what that means for their study, for their energy levels, for their other life commitments. And she says that out of something simple as this, there's some really interesting conversation that builds in empathy and human care amongst the students. So I think something like this is, very simple and could easily be done online with, perhaps different kinds of questions or with a poll or something like that.
So ways of building relationships, really, and letting people know that there are people there who are interested in them and listening to them.
At 5 a.m. to travel to uni, whereas some people get up at 8 o'clock for an 8:30 class. It's not something that I suppose students or lecturers often think about.
Yes, indeed. Was there another you wanted to share?
Yes, so the second example is as a result of COVID, the lecturer set up in the online discussion forum a place called Care Corner. And this was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And this was a space where students could share about how they were feeling, as well as identify things that they needed. And from this, she was really surprised to discover that some of her students didn't have a computer, which we've, sort of found out through media and all that sort of thing, that this was one of the factors affecting many students once campus was closed off. And so she organised some loan laptops for them. She also found out that some students didn't have enough food and they didn't have money to get groceries. So she asked them what they needed and found herself in shops she'd never been in and buying food she'd never heard of before. and organising food drops. So something really simple, but so crucial for student wellbeing and, you know, Third example is an institutional one. So this is an online tool that was developed, which was based on the student experience survey. There were some additional questions on reasons for considering leaving, and this included follow-up interviews with students. And then using that combined data, the tool was developed where there are 3 responses to each question, as well as links to various supports and activities. And depending on student selection, this prompts them to actually do something specific, like contact student support services by a certain date. And then at the end of the questions, it generates an individual action plan, which is then emailed to the student, as well as alerting some services if the student has selected that. So, you know, I think there's 3 really good examples of good practice.
That's great. Thanks, Janine. In fact, you know, we've had a number of people really wanting to know. So we're looking for more ideas, is what the question says, and lots of people have ticked that box. So what you've done there is talk about some ideas that can be relatively simply implemented. So that's fantastic. We have a question too about your wonderful chord diagram, about the complexity of equity groups. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more, perhaps comment a bit more on the complexity, the equity complexity that you depict in that chord diagram, and how you sort of came up with that, and what's the most common combination of those complex factors.
The complexity, as you know, when students select more than one equity category, and I think in my presentation the table kind of shows that it sort of doesn't look that complex, but the chord diagram is a way of connecting the students. So on the left-hand side of the diagram are all the 80 students, and they're kind of grouped into whether or not they chose 1 or 2 or 3 or up to 7 other categories apart from regional. And then on the other side are the categories that they chose. So those ribbons sort of link across to from students to categories. And I'm not quite sure if there's a better way to kind of visualise it, but for me, having it in that sort of relationship between students and equity factors was much more meaningful than having it in a table.
Well, it certainly shows the multiplicity of the equity categories and the way we combine.
Some of the, I don't know, I can't remember offhand what all of the category combinations would be, and there might be, I'm sort of thinking about how to refine it so that it's a bit more understandable, but say, for example, a regional +3 might be a student who is regional, of course, who with disability plus low SES circumstances plus mature age. So that's in effect 4 equity factors.
Okay.
So I suppose the purpose is really just to show the complexity.
Yeah. Okay. And one of the other questions that came from the registrations was, just generally speaking, were there significant differences between male and female students and between mature age and younger students in terms of their experiences of university and their needs and so on?
Okay, I've looked at the data, and at this stage I can say that yes, there are differences. I can't delve into that too deeply at the moment. But since I recorded the snapshot, my participant numbers have almost doubled. So I was having a look at the data yesterday, and so the differences between male and female students. So with the bigger number of 156, there were still far fewer males, 17 in fact, from all of that. Although in the survey there was about 19 respondents who skipped the question, so there could be more males, but I can say with certainty that there's 17. The differences that I looked at yesterday were that the subjects that the males were studying was mainly engineering and sciences. There was 3 in arts and education, but there was none in health.
Right.
Between the mature age and the younger students, the new data has changed those percentages slightly. So I can say that the over 25 tended to stay in their regional locations, while the under 25s were more likely to move far away. So that was sitting at around 57% said that they moved far away, whereas over 25s, 93% said that they stayed in their area.
Okay.
So with the under 25s moving away, this could reflect the context of the state and the location that many of these later participants were studying and coming from. So I think there's going to be some contextual details that I'll need to tease out there as well.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question here that a number of people have wanted answered about whether you have any thoughts on the role of place and country in higher education that has arisen from your research. The question here is, can one really belong with infrequent campus attendance? And presumably that refers to perhaps people studying online, not coming physically onto campus space. And can higher education truly serve the country if it's place and campus bound? So I guess really your thoughts on the role of place and country in higher education and belonging when people are not able to physically access those spaces. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think they're both really critical. That sense of belonging, and sometimes I think perhaps we need to be a bit more creative in thinking about how we do foster those, the sense of being in a safe space. So online, it's the interaction, relationships, whether that's online, on a big campus, on a regional campus.
So it's about the sense of belonging, about the sense of connection, leads to the sense of belonging. Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it, and feeling that you can. This came out in Nicole's talk yesterday. Where you can just be yourself. So wherever that is, virtually, in reality, I think they're the kinds of things that need to be thought about in creative ways to do that. In terms of country, a few students mentioned the importance of, if they were learning off country, to make sure that they were able to return home regularly, because that was just so important to their sense of well-being and for rejuvenating and getting back together with family. So two very important things, especially for regional and remote students.
Okay.
So more of that might come out in the data, the more that I, you know, sort of delve into that.
Yeah, great. And another popular question is, this is an interesting one. You were talking before about the important role of the regional university centres and regional campuses in small regional campuses in giving students a physical place to go. This is a question about whether or not you think there might be a place for metropolitan universities to work more closely with regional universities and I guess collaborate a bit more, what this is really about, so that regional online students could be provided with places and spaces on a metropolitan campus that might be close to where they live. And the person asking this question is saying, having studied online with a metro university, I never knew at the time I could use spaces in my town. So, for instance, the student might be studying in a metro university, they might be living quite close to a regional campus. Is there an opportunity there that we're missing?
Well, I think there obviously is. A couple of participants did kind of opposite to that, where there are.
You're cutting out a bit, Janine.
They were not allowed to access it because they were, I think they were enrolled as an on-campus student, but this was just for online students. So they fought hard to be able to get access to those facilities. And finally they got access. So, you know, I think some of the sentiments around those kinds of things is that the metro centres don't really understand the nature of travel and the distances that some students have to travel to get to their, if they're on campus, to get to their on-campus classes. And if, or, you know, on campus to the library or to study. And if they had access to something that was closer, they would certainly make use of it. So I think there's definitely, you know, scope for some kind of cross-pollination there between metro and regional.
Yeah, certainly a nice idea, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Given that you've been undertaking the research this year of all years, I really feel I have to ask you, to what extent have regional students talked about how the pandemic has affected them? Okay,
yeah, that's a really big thing, which obviously I didn't think would, you know, beginning of the fellowship, didn't realise how big it would be. So it really did affect regional students, and mostly in a negative way, so that's probably not surprising, although there were some who found it was quite positive for their experience. So in terms of their study experience, the uncertainty and the rapid shift to remote learning really unsettled a lot of students, so having to change their study plans, and it also, they were worried it was going to have an effect on their progression. Some even withdrew from their studies for the semester, just until things settled down and they had some certainty. The cutting off of access was also really concerning, so to campus services, but also to community facilities that they might have used, you know, as they were also closed to the public. But for some, the move to online improved their study experience. So one person said that the lecturers were more accessible, and in live lectures it was more interactive, so they really benefited from that.
That's so interesting. More interactive.
More interactive, yeah. And another said that support was suddenly more equitable across modes of delivery, because, and others had kind of been asking for online options and told it wasn't possible, and then suddenly COVID made it all possible. So, you know, they were really pleased that they could now do some of their courses online. So the experience, as as from the student perspective, so that was the study experience. From the student experience, the biggest thing was the uncertainty about the future. For some, it confirmed that they were absolutely in the right degree course, while others were finding it hard to see how what they were doing was going to be relevant for the future. And others were also concerned about whether to pack up and return home before borders closed and to pick up their studies there. And others who decided to stay were really terrified and lonely because it was virtually a ghost town where they were living on campus.
Right.
So there's a lot of emotion and anxiety related to the uncertainty, but also the added stress for parents and mostly mothers who then had to homeschool their children, as well as manage their own study and work and all that goes with this. And we also can't forget that some of these students have coped with the drought, then the bushfires, then the floods, and then COVID on top of all of that.
Yeah.
So
a massive year, hasn't it? Yes.
It has. Yeah.
Yeah, so
and
it's
then for staff.
Yep.
I was just going to add for staff, some felt that their students were being guinea pigs with online ways of doing things because it was rushed and there was no time to prepare properly. But, you know, despite all of this, they used creative ways to keep in touch with their students and, you know, just trying to maintain a virtual open door policy. So it's been tough for them too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds as if your research brings out some of the innovation that's happened, some of the care for students that a lot of staff have definitely been taking. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a very nice, a lovely comment on the Q&A, which is just congratulating you on a beautiful presentation. So calm and just what we needed this year. Thank you. And I think that is a reflection of the stressful year that we've had, and that this how powerful student quotes are. And you know, again, the question is really about how can we serve our students better. It's been such a hard year for them to keep going, and what else can we do as staff to help them keep going? So I suppose I'm curious to know what are some of the other key things that students have talked about that perhaps might provide some answers to that question.
Well, students are, one of the things I asked them was, what are the qualities of regional people? And the overwhelming quality was that they are resilient, that they're used to coping with things that come up. They're used to problem solving and sort of working their way around things. And so in that sense, I think that they are well equipped. However, and I've forgotten the question now, sorry.
Oh, it was just really around some of the key things that students talked about that perhaps might give some clues to those of us working with regional students as to what else can we do to help them keep going when times are tough.
Yeah, I think it's that human connection again, and just knowing that someone is there. Like, it could be a phone call, it could be some people said, no, we don't use the uni email, we use WhatsApp or we use Slack, or, you know, we text because that's, you know, the easiest way to get to students. So I think it's just focusing on, you know, that care and connection that they know, and, you know, this might be just a once-off thing, but sometimes I think students just knowing that someone's there is really, really comforting for them. And then perhaps finding out, like my example with the care corner, you know, finding out what are you needing? Is there anything that you're lacking that we can perhaps help you with or connect you with some kind of support? So pointing them, that was one of the things that some students said, you know, it's so hard to navigate some of these services. We just wish there was a one-stop shop where you could just click on something and everything, you know, all the possibilities were there. So that's probably another thing that would be really helpful for students.
Yes, sure, because it can be very difficult, can't it, to sort of navigate all the things on the website to find exactly what they're looking for. So I understand that point. Yeah. It seems that your research keeps coming back to, or the findings keep coming back to, is the importance of that connection, that sense of connection, the sense that someone's there, interested in them, caring about them. Just a question about the Caring Corner. Was that done online? Was that an online intervention, the Caring Corner?
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit.
Oh, I was just curious about the Caring Corner, whether that was an online intervention. Was that something done online?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was. So she set it up as part of the, in the discussion forum space. So it was just its own little discussion forum. Yeah.
Lovely idea. Yeah.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it was very effective.
And a purely practical question, Janine. There are a few people wanting to know, how on earth did you manage to contact and interview so many students? Did you use Zoom? Did you phone them? How did you do it?
Okay, most of the, so I think I did 27 interviews in the end, and that was by phone, and 129 surveys. So that's 156 students. In saying that, the survey data was amazingly rich. I was gobsmacked at the answers some of the students provided. They were not just one-liners. They were like really meaty responses. And so it felt like, you know, I was having this conversation with them anyway. But then the students who were interviewed were just also amazing with the kinds of things that they shared. And, you know, this was, you know, their story and their experience. And yeah, so how I recruited was I started off with the universities in the regional universities networks and the innovative research universities. Sorry. So I started off with those two organisations and got so interested universities sort of came on board that way, and then COVID hit, so some of them said, oh look, we can't bombard our students, so I delayed recruiting for 4 to 6 months. So some of those came on board, but others just didn't, and I, you know, totally understand why. But you know, regardless, I'm really happy with the 156 student participants, and I've also got 40 staff, and I've also got 30 Year 12 students.
Oh, look, it's impressive, given the year that we've had, that you managed to, you know, gather such an amount of rich data. It's just wonderful. Just my very final question is, what's next from this research? Where's this going now?
Okay. So I'm just going to look to the immediate future, and the immediate future is I need to put together the final report. So I'm working on that, and I'm also developing a website. So this is going to be called Regional Student Futures, and so that's going to contain some of the resources that are developed from the data, and a reflective tool, and yeah, that's sort of the basis for the website.
That's great.
And that will be openly available.
Wonderful. Something for us all to look forward to. Thank you, Janine. Sarah's joined, so I know we're running out of time. Thanks so much for asking all these questions. I'm going to hand back over to Sarah now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Janine. Thank you, Cathy. We've had huge engagement on the Q&A and in the chat pod. And I have to say, I think quite a few family members in there as well, Janine, all cheering you on.
Are there? Yay!
Yeah, so I'm going to finish up there and just remind everyone that if you would like to engage with the centre and hear more about the work that we're doing, then please do come and check out our webpage, sign up for our newsletter. We send it out every 6 to 8 weeks. We basically cover everything that's happening that we know about within the equity sector, and we are there as a resource for everyone. So without any further ado, I'm going to stop it there. And again, thank Cathy and Janine, and thank you, Janine, for putting up with extra. It was very, I think, a regional remote experience in terms of your internet. So thank you for persevering and joining us by phone. And goodbye to everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.